I determine the need for volunteers from the amount of positions that are necessary for a weekend service. Not just the positions, but then I usually try to times it by 7. I don't know how I came to that number. I think that part of the process behind that was if you want to have someone serve once a month, if you put 2 months together, there would be obviously, or 8 weeks at that point. So if someone served 1 month, let's say they had to spot serve another time, maybe in that week, then hopefully I'd be able to give them the next month off to refresh themselves. Because it's not only important for your volunteers to serve, but it's also important for them to be served to. And so if I had people that were always serving, they don't have the opportunity to sit there and be served.
It's kind of event-based. There are times where we can get by with 10 or 15 volunteers, or we can get by with 2. So it kind of depends on the event and what we're trying to cover.
The basic, obvious way is we need people in a variety of positions, and if we don't have them, then we definitely have a need. It also comes for special events. And other things, that those one-off situations, or if we're trying to develop something further, like previously we haven't had a stagehand role, but now we're moving a lot more things around on stage during a service, and so we're developing a role, we need volunteers.
Ministry drives need, and if you're going to have a successful ministry, obviously it's going to take people. And so usually, let's say in a worship service, for example, we know that we want to lift our voices to the Lord in worship, and so we want to have a band, and therefore you have to have an audio engineer and mixing and all that stuff. And so once you know what your ministry is going to be, then you kind of work backwards to figure out exactly what the needs are.
Over a weekend, we have 3 service blocks, one on Saturday and Sunday morning and Sunday night, which adds up to 9 services over a weekend. So for our team, we'd at least need 3 sets of anything. So on our teams, we'd have front of house, lighting, monitors, a couple stage managers, a TD, and depending on what else is going on, maybe a couple other roles. But that in itself would be about 6 people a service times 3 service blocks, so it adds up really quickly. And then for each space, you'd want to have a few extras as well. So for our team, that could be up to 30-ish people on a roster that can be, or a pool that can be chosen to set up a roster.
My current rotation for volunteers in lighting would be about 6 individuals. However, our current pool of video volunteers is in the area of 60. Our image magnification, our IMAG rotation would be about the same as our lighting. And in our audio field, I would say it's maybe 10. We have a front of house position and a production room, as well as somebody that will aid other ministries that are occurring during services on the weekend around the building.
I have 45 volunteers right now. So on a given weekend, we have 4 cameras. 3 of them are tripod fixed cameras. Another one is a roaming camera, which can do what it says, roam anywhere you need to go. I have a stage manager, then we have a lighting designer, a graphics operator. That's the person who pretty much puts the words up on the screen, as well as any announcements that may be happening, graphic videos that may be running. Then you have a shader who operates the iris on the camera, and then video director and video tech director, or a switcher. We are fortunate enough to be able to hire in a professional front of house engineer each weekend, and that stemmed from the need for consistency and sound complaints that no church ever has to deal with. So obviously that's not right, and so that's the luxury that that we have here. So in a given weekend, I would say there's, I think, 14 positions total that need done.
The size of a team would really be, like I said, what's required, but it's also that people aren't being run ragged, but at the same time they are being used. If you're not actually being used, you tend to forget little details about what you're doing, or you just get rusty. And if you're going 2 months between each time you're doing sound or stage managing or stuff like that, you're not actually around enough to know things that may have changed, or remember the finer details of what you're doing, or get into a routine yourself. So it really is a fine line between having enough people so you do have extras but not having too many, which, like I said, depending on your church, you'll need to find a balance of.
The volunteer crews, there are audio crews and video crews. The audio crew is typically just 3 people. You would have an audio engineer, a recording director, recording tech, and then you would have the audio director who's in charge of the whole service and other things like that. Then on the video crew, we'd have 1 volunteer per camera operator, a switcher. Sometimes you have a producer calling the shots. Video director is a lot of times the producer as well. So typically we would have about 6 or 7 people on a crew. And then that crew will rotate. Another crew comes in the next week, so they're not exhausted. We find that 3 weeks rotation is the best. It keeps your skills fresh, but yet you're not burned out.
When somebody lets you know they're interested, then it's playing the game of finding out where they'll fit per the needs that we currently have. However, there are occasions where we need volunteers and nobody stepped forward. This last summer, we tried a congregation-wide, we called it our Connect Weekend. And the goal was to spur all the congregants that have been coming to find a way to engage deeper in the church. And so all the ministries, obviously tech and everything included, were represented, and we had essentially a carnival of sorts out in the parking lot where people could interact and engage and ask questions. And we were able to compile a relatively large list of people that might be interested in helping out in one area or another. And it was very effective for us to get a list of people we may be able to put to use in our volunteer pool. I definitely encourage all of our volunteers to, as they mingle with the congregation and meet new people or friends or anyone else that they may be trying to draw in to come to this church with them, to let them know their story of how they got involved in their tech department and why they're interested and why they continue to serve, and that commitment of being a servant within your church does for their spirit. And share that with people, because I feel like a testimony is always going to be the most effective way to communicate with people versus simply saying, hey, what do you think about doing this?
We sometimes have open house kind of options. Some people are intimidated when they see big cameras, big soundboards, big light boards, computers all over the place, screens. They get intimidated because it's this like, oh my gosh, look at all that stuff. How am I gonna do that? And so sometimes the best way is to say, well, touch it. Let's see what you can do. That usually helps drop a lot of the guards that people have or fears that people have about the availability of doing it. I have a main volunteer of mine is a 70-year-old woman who is our switcher, and she didn't know anything, and she got started, and she is one of the most devoted people that we have on the team, and she loves it. So you've got the 16-year-old who runs the roaming camera to the 70-year-old grandma who's in video control switching.
When recruiting volunteers, you kind of have to decide whether this is a mission critical position or if it's an easier position, just hitting the record button, for example. And so I've been burned in ministry by almost staffing my crews with any warm body that's willing to serve. And actually what happens is some of those roles, like the audio engineer and the video director, you can't staff that with someone who has no skills at all. And so, you have to cultivate the volunteers. So when you're recruiting, it's always good to have entry-level positions that almost any person can fill.
The only real thing we look for to start out is that you will commit and that you have a heart for the church, really. You don't have to show up with any technical knowledge. You can learn that along the way. Basically, if you have a heart to serve the church and want to see it do well, then we can train you on the rest. As we get people involved, especially if they're new to anything technical, we'll get them involved and we'll get them shadowing people, doing some simpler tasks that they'll be fine to do. And the more they're around, the more we'll get them involved. And over time, you see where people thrive and what people are good at. If you see people are really good at organization, maybe get them into like a stage managing or technical director role. If they're awesome with working with people, maybe like a monitors engineer, so they're working with the band. Things like that, just seeing where their strengths lie and how we can use that to better the team as a whole.